feel good, and I'm trying to, gain some weight. I lost a lot of weight.
Oh, well, no one in our family is trying to gain weight.
Well, I just want to get back strong.
Although I lost quite after John died, I could.
Managing an RV
Oh,
park over in Brenda, in a town called Brenda, over by Portside. So I drove up to there yesterday, and they were fixing to go to a potluck. All these people come.
Test.
And then they had
Proper
all the
height
fritters,
test.
potato salad, and coleslaw, and the pea salad, and, oh, man, you talk about. What they look like, and I don't want anything real expensive.
Yeah.
And, so that's where these boots came from.
No, I mean, what is it? Why do you have to have cowboy boots to ride a horse?
Well, the heel, see,
The hill?
yeah, the stirrup on the saddle it's about this big, and if you try to ride with
Tennis shoes.
flat sole shoes, well, your foot's liable to slip
Slide
through
right
that stirrup.
through.
Yeah, and then the wreck's on. You go right in your epitaph.
All right, Larry, have him say the date and his name and how to spell it, and then you can start.
Okay. So your name?
My name is Jim Slater. I was born
your
in
last name just for the heck of it.
Slater,
And today's date is?
April 1st, 2002.
There you go. And you were born
I was born in 1938, August the 21st,
where?
Louisville, Texas,
Cool.
on the family farm. I was born at home, and that's how come I have this birthmark on my nose. The doctor finally came. I weighed almost 9 pounds, and back then the country doctor was all they had. They didn't go to the hospital then. And anyway, old Doc Kirk finally came just as I was being born, and he put some forceps on my head to help, pull me.
Uh-huh.
And one side slipped off and hit my.
Kind of bruised you a little bit there.
Yeah, it's called a hematoma, and a port wine stain. Some people say that it didn't happen that way. Said I was born with a birthmark, but mother said that's what happened.
So is Gerald older or younger than you?
He's 18 months older
Okay.
than me.
And then any other siblings?
Yeah, we had two sisters, Charlene, who was born in 1928, and Anna Laura, who was born in 1929. So the girls there's 10 years difference between the girls and us boys, and there's 18 months difference between the two girls and 18 months difference between the two boys.
All right.
So that worked out. They kind of had two families there. By the time we came along, well, the girls were big enough to babysit and give us spankings. And
cousin Charlene was famous for her hospitality.
yeah, Charlene she was really a worker as far as the family goes. She really did a lot to keep the family together and make sure that everybody was comfortable. I've never known of anybody being around Charlene that didn't leave there feeling comfortable, because she had a way about her to really make people feel at ease, and she was really instrumental in keeping the cousins reunion going. And in fact, your mom and dad came to one in 1993, I believe it was.
I heard about those after the fact, after they happened.
And I was living in Tempe, Arizona at the time. I was managing a Motel 6, and John Herschel and Ada came by and visited with us there in the motel. And I was telling John, the fondest memory I have of Ada is that night. I said, they were getting ready to leave, and I said, why don't you guys stay 2 or 3 days with her? And they just said, you can't put up with me for 3 days. So I thought that was kind of funny. I said, well, I'll die trying. They were in a hurry. They had to go, so they left. And then, of course, I never did see John Herschel anymore after that.
So how did you first know my dad, John Herschel?
Well, I had heard an awful lot about him from my mom, who dearly loved him. He would come and stay with my family after his father died. Well, Mother would dote John Herschel and Joe Lester because they didn't have a father, and she had 2 daughters that were about the same age as John Herschel, and so they were kind of like brother and sisters, you know. And he would come and they would go camping and fishing and swimming in the river, and we had a farm out east of Louisville, and he liked to come there, and we had a place to fish, and of course we had horses and hay and, you know,
All the good
things
stuff.
that he wasn't used to being around, you know, and he really liked to come to our place. And of course Mother was a award-winning cook, and John Herschel loved her cooking. His favorite dish was red beans.
Real? Oh, mine. I can.
He loved pinto beans, and Mother would, you know, she'd kind of spice them up a little bit with peppers or maybe some meat, you know. And John Herschel he thought that was the greatest. But I didn't really get to enjoy him all that much because I was too little. In fact, I probably wasn't even born when they were doing all that. And then the first time I ever met him was after he got out of the Navy.
Oh.
I saw pictures of him because he would send Mother pictures of him aboard ship and in his Navy uniform, and I thought that was pretty neat. You know, it's one of my cousins in the service, and then I think John Herschel came when Mother and Daddy died. I'm not sure. I'd have to ask Ada. But it seemed like that's the first time I met your mom, and that was in 1968. And as a matter of fact, my mother died on your mother's birthday.
Oh, in '68.
Yeah, she's
Oh.
been dead 34 years, day after tomorrow.
Wow.
And Daddy died March the 26th, 7 days before Mother did. And in fact, I got an email from Gerald
Oh,
the other day, and of course, you know, it's been 34 years, and I kind of lose track, you know, unless someone reminds me. And he said, he reminded me that Daddy had been dead 34 years.
Come on in, Ada. Come around behind him because there's a wire here.
Can you get by?
I sure can.
All right.
Go ahead.
okay. So you're telling us about Gerald just sent you an email.
Tell me about one of the great American heroes that died 34 years ago on that date. That was the 26th. And of course,
Your father.
it reminded me that it'd been 34 years. And how long has John Herschel been dead?
In
90
August, it will be 8 years.
94. That was just a year after y'all came by to see me, wasn't it? Y'all were there in 93. Huh. That was
So tell us about your dad again. What was your father's name?
my dad was Clarence Slater, and he was an only child.
Did he have a middle name?
Roscoe. Clarence
Roscoe.
Roscoe Slater
And your mom's maiden name?
was Dungan. I have to get that right. I've been saying Dunnigan for 64 years, but now I've got to say Dungan. It's not done again, it's Dungan.
Yeah.
And Mother was one of 6 girls, and she was a sister to your dad's dad,
And what was her full name again?
Maddie Irene.
Maddie Irene. Okay.
And the other girls' names were Audie, Lorene, Jimmy, Johnny, Obira, and Irene. That's 6.
And so now we just have Aunt Jimmy left.
Aunt Jimmy's the only one left, and we got to enjoy her last year on our cousin reunion, which, by the way, you were the only Dungan there. It was a Dungan reunion, but Larry was the only Dungan there.
And for the first time, before I met that was the first time I met any of you.
I know.
That was great.
I know it, and I hope it won't be the last time. That's the only sad thing about this reunion here is that I didn't get to meet you guys 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I just, sometimes the geographical location of our home is not conducive to weekly visits. And
Not only that, but it's tough times when everybody's working. And,
Yeah. Yeah, and raising a family, and it's hard to just pick up and go somewhere where the reunion is being held. But
So why don't you tell us a little bit about your dad?
my dad was he was Superman. He was Tarzan. He was my hero. He could swim Ritter's Lake underwater.
Wow.
He could swim across it and back underwater. I've never seen anyone that could hold her breath as long as he did. And back during the war, back before you was born, everything was rationed that had to do with guns or ammunition or gas or
Meat, milk.
yeah. And my dad would go squirrel hunting on Sunday morning, and if he took 2 bullets, he'd bring back 2 squirrels. If he took 3 bullets, he'd bring back 3 squirrels.
Because you couldn't waste bullets.
And that's right. And sometimes he didn't have but one, and he'd bring back 1 squirrel. And that meat wouldn't be ruined either. It'd be shot in the eye, in the head.
Yeah.
And he never would let us hunt with a shotgun. We always had to hunt with 22. And Daddy was like I said, he was an only child, and he was raised on the family farm. And he was very innovative. In fact, if he'd had a formal education, he could have been an engineer, because he had a knack for making things work. Of course, Daddy went from the team and wagon to the tractor, and whenever Granddaddy bought the tractor, well, Daddy was the only one that could drive it, because Granddaddy never did drive. He always went on a wagon driving a team.
Mm-hmm.
And as a matter of fact, he wouldn't even ride in the front seat of a car. He was afraid that if Daddy were to have a wreck, well, he'd be the first one there. So he'd ride in the back seat. And everybody in town, they teased. Everybody called him Uncle Johnny. His name was John Wesley Slater. And
Your father?
no, his father.
Oh, his father.
Yeah,
Oh,
Daddy was Clarence Roscoe.
right.
But whenever they would go to town on Saturday, well, Daddy would drive, and there'd be Granddaddy in the back seat, like a big plantation owner, And everybody said, "Here comes that big plantation owner." But they really gave him a hard time about that car. But my grandmother, my dad's mother, she learned to drive.
Oh.
She got pretty good.
Do you remember her name?
Her name was Beulah.
Not Stone. No.
No, her name was Decker.
Decker.
Her maiden name was Decker. I was trying to think of her middle name.
Beulah Decker. Okay.
Beulah Decker. Maybe she didn't have it one name. But anyway,
Now, were they Texas people or?
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah, the Decker family came to Texas from Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
And the Slater family came from, I believe it was Arkansas. And one of our cousins, before I forget it, do you remember J.W. Dyson,
Yeah.
the ex-policeman? Well, he was doing some research on the Dungan
Now,
family.
He was a detective, and he's on oxygen now, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's him. He went to Mississippi or Alabama
Show me those pictures.
and went to the county courthouse. He got some information off the internet about some of Grandpa Dungan's family. And so he went down there and went to the courthouse, and he found a document in the records where our great-great-grandpa bought a mule and a Negro.
Wow.
And he had the deed. There was the abstract deed to that property. And he printed it, and of course, I saw a copy of it. But I've been trying to get him to send me a copy of it. But
That's not J.W., is it? No.
No, that's ain't Jimmy and Uncle Herman.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And
I have you and Mary Lou.
good, Matt, that old man's old. And, you know, that's when I first realized that I was sick, is whenever I started looking at those pictures at that reunion.
Oh, really?
I was thin. I was telling your mom, I never was a Charles Atlas by any means, but I was always, you know, I always carried a little flesh.
But now you're putting it back on since
Yeah.
you chemotherapy. Yeah.
Yeah, I quit that chemo.
Oh.
I dropped that stuff. I'm gonna trust the Lord to heal me, and because He don't make me sick. That chemo makes me sick, and I don't want any more of it. But getting back to Daddy, he was a great hunter and fisherman. He loved to hunt and fish, and he loved his family. He was very understanding. He was very quiet. He never did have to. He whipped me one time in my life, and I'll never forget it. After we got rid of the horses, my granddad bought a tractor, and it was on steel. I don't know whether you have ever seen a tractor with all lug wheels, but
Yeah.
they didn't have rubber tires. They had lugs, and they were very sharp, and you know, it gave it more traction. And he was afraid for us kids to ride, because if we were to fall off, we'd fall under those wheels, you know, and it just,
Tear you up.
yeah. And so our farm was down by Ritter's Lake, and then we had another place that my dad leased, and it was about 3 miles north of there. And so he would go up to plow that field up there, and we had some people living on the place, and I liked to go up there and play with their kids while he was plowing. But he told me, he said, no, I don't want you to go because I'm afraid you'll fall off. And so, of course, I throwed me a little tantrum, and he said, now you just stay here, you're not going. And so this old tractor was real slow, and it crawled, you know. And so I let him get pretty good ways up the road, and I thought, if I catch him, he'll let me go rather than make me walk back. But that didn't happen. He saw me coming, and he got off, and he had his belt, and he whipped my little hiney back to the house. And he said, now, when I tell you no, I mean no, and, you know. And so from then on, all he had to do was just clear his throat, and I knew he meant business. I never argued with him. I'd argue with Mother a little bit, but not Daddy.
Do you remember the address for that farm?
Yeah, Route 1, Louisville, Texas.
Route 1.
Yeah, the other side of the river.
Yeah, just your name, Route 1.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, across the river. And in fact, the people in Louisville called my brother and I the Cross River Boys.
Oh.
We were Cross River Boys because we lived on the other side of the river. And we grew up there on that farm, and I was born in 38. My brother was born in 37. And we worked, Daddy, about right after the war, or maybe it was during the war, Daddy took a job in Dallas. And so me and my brother stayed there and followed our granddaddy and learned how to hoe cotton and how to pull Johnson grass and how to feed and how to milk and take care of the farm, you know. And one day my grandmother was knitting, and granddaddy had gone to town. A neighbor came by and took him to Louisville. And
Yeah.
But anyway, when he came back, he had a large manila envelope, and she said he walked by and he just pitched it over in her lap. She was sitting there knitting, and she said, "What's this?" And he said, "That's the deed to this farm." And he had gone to town and paid it off.
Wow.
And he said, "It's ours." And he said, "Nobody can ever take it." And it wasn't even a year until the government came by and said, "We're going to take your farm. We got to build a lake."
Oh.
And he grieved from then until he died. He had worked so hard, and whenever he borrowed the money to buy that farm, he never signed a note. Never. He just said, "I'll pay you back," and they shook hands, and that's the way it was. And he had a reputation of honesty and he didn't fight. You know, a lot of the people that lived around there, you know, fought the government, but there wasn't any way you could win. And Granddaddy said, you know, they'll wind up spending all that they're going to get for lawyers. And he said, whenever the government wants something, you might as well just knuckle under. And so we wound up with enough money to buy 2 homes there in town, you know, and they didn't want at that time, Granddaddy was getting pretty old, and Daddy was working in Dallas, so they didn't want to buy another farm, so they bought 2 homes in Louisville, and we moved into town in 1949. And but I never lost my love for the farm or horses, and so that's how come I turned out to be a cowboy. My brother was very academic, and of course he went on and got a doctorate. Yeah. But I went the other way. I finally, after I went to work for a family called Phillips that was in the oil business, and I trained their horses, and I worked for them for about 31 years. And I got an associate degree in animal husbandry, agribusiness later on, but I never was too academic. But
So how did you know? You knew Granddad. That everyone called Papa. But, I know it's jumping tracks a little bit, but can you tell us a little bit about Papa and how what you remember of him?
yeah, he was.
Did he live around you guys?
Yeah, in fact, he lived with us the last 2 or 3 years that he lived. Grandma Duncan died before I remember knowing her. I never did know her.
Yeah. Now she was part Indian.
Yeah. I've seen pictures of her, and she really shows a lot of Indian features.
Mm-hmm.
But Papa was, he was kind of an Abe Lincoln looking guy. He was tall and slender and very pleasant, quiet, generous kind of a guy, and taught me how to play checkers, and he taught me how to play dominoes.
So you play dominoes with him. That's good.
Yeah, oh yeah, and he had a cigar in his mouth, but he would never light it. He'd just chew it, and he had he had a little can, and every once in a while he'd spit in that can, and he'd chew on that cigar, but he never would light it. And of course, all 6 of his daughters were still alive whenever he got sick, and he would stay with one for a while, and he'd stay with another one. And of course, they all had families, and they were all working, and so it was a little bit harder on the rest of them than it was Mother, because she wasn't working. She was at home, and she could kind of take care of him. And when he died, well, he was buried in Oak Grove. I don't know whether you got a chance to go to that cemetery or not.
Yeah, Gerald took me.
Good deal. And when y'all come this summer, we'll take John and your mom and show them where they were buried. I think that his wife's name was Ellen. Now we talked about that a while ago, but I think her name was Ellen.
So I put any papers in there on genealogy.
I know that that's right, because when we did, when I did a sheet there, you're right there.
And so it may be a coincidence that John named his daughter Ellen.
Yeah, it is a coincidence, but I think.
Yeah. And who knows? Maybe fate.
So, what did he do for work?
Papa?
Mm-hmm.
He was a farmer.
Now, what is his full name, Papa's name?
James Madison.
James Madison.
J.M. Dungan, and my initials are J.M. Slater. Mother, I think she did that in memory of her father, named me J.M. I was named after Aunt Jimmy, her sister.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and where they got the Merle, I'll never know. It came out of the blue. See, my brother's name is Clarence Gerald.
Okay.
And my name is Jimmy Merle. Mm-hmm. So I think they kind of did it so it would rhyme, and I think they just made up that Merle. But it's spelled just like Gerald, except it's got an M instead of a G. Mm-hmm. And but Mother told me that she graduated from Prosper High School. Prosper is in Collin County. And it's right north of Frisco, Texas.
I would love to get a high school yearbook and see the pictures in that.
Mother had a picture of her class, and it was the 11th grade. They didn't go to 12 grades then. They just went to 11, and she graduated from the 11th grade in Prosper, Texas. And Papa was sharecropping a farm for a guy named Hughes. Mm-hmm. One of the Hughes boys that was the same age of my mother, that went to school with my mother, was my next door neighbor after I became grown and had a family of my own. He lived next to us, lived right across the pasture from us. And he knew all the, he knew Papa, and they lived on the farm in a house that belonged to the Hughes family. And Papa would get a third, they called it a third and fourth. Papa would get a third of what the cotton brought and a fourth of what the grain brought. So he made his living. And
yeah, pick the cotton too?
Yeah.
That's why the larger share?
Yeah. And of course they were just kind of like hands on the farm, but they didn't get a check. They didn't get a weekly check. They got paid whenever they got the cotton out and when they got the grain out. But
Mom had a question. Do you recall your mother talking about John Herschel's you know, her brother, that was John Herschel's father, because the aunts all spoke of him as being a very special person.
They said he was. They said his demeanor was a lot like Papa. He was a little heavier, and he chewed tobacco.
Mm-hmm. Now, who's this we're talking about now?
This is your grandfather,
Okay.
Duncan, John Herschel's daddy.
Mm-hmm.
And they said that they didn't really know what happened. They know that the train hit his car and it killed him. But they knew that he chewed tobacco, and he kept a can sitting down in the floorboard of the car. And he would, once in a while, he'd have to reach down and get it, you know, to spit, and then he'd put it back down. And they figure that he was either reaching down to get it or putting it back. And he just didn't see that train.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Mother has told me a lot about him. And of course, I was kind of curious about him because I knew Uncle Byron, but I never did know Uncle Herschel because he got killed before I was born. But she was, I think she was partial to Herschel because he was the oldest. He was older than Uncle Byron.
Hmm.
And I think, well, Mother was the oldest, and then Herschel, and then Aunt Audie, and I can't remember how but my mother was the oldest of the 8 kids.
Wow.
But they talked about that he helped them all with their homework, and that he was a very defensive, you know, he took care of his sisters.
He sure did. That's what Mother said. And he was pretty bright because I remember her telling about he would help them with their school books, you know, the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Well, I know that Grandma, Elise Nevins, told me that he had just been promoted for like a week before he died. So he was the mechanic in charge of the trucks for, was it a bakery?
I think so.
Yeah.
I believe that's
in
right.
Dallas. So, So back on to Papa, you don't remember his wife, but he lives with you guys in town. Do you
No.
remember him out on the farm?
He lived with us on the farm.
Oh, on the farm.
He died. We moved in the winter of '49, and I think Papa died in the fall of '49
Okay.
because it was before we moved to town.
And that's why he's buried where he is.
Yeah, over in Collin County. Well, see, now there's some more Dungans in McKinney. Bill Dungan, and I think there's a Joe, and maybe a John. But see, they were cousins to my mother, and we were never very close, but we have met and we talked, and we always say, well, let's all get together, you know, but we don't ever do it. And something always happens, and you know, I think it would be kind of neat, maybe this year, if we could get a hold of one of them.
I'll have to call down there because I remember in McKinney we stopped by and there's a Duncan floor, something or other, and
Furniture?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So that would be fun.
it would be kind of neat. I didn't know Joe Lester was dead.
Oh.
I guess maybe somebody told me, but I'd forgotten about it. But I was curious about him.
He had a rifle that he and my dad used. He had it up in his house. Aunt Sheila, you know, and he had it, and he said that I don't know if it's the same gun that your dad had, but they took it out and there was the same thing. They had bullets, and they would take, you know, they were like a penny a bullet or something, and they would buy the bullets, go out and shoot either some rabbits or some squirrels, skin and prepare the meat and sell it. In the black part of town, apparently, as far as what Uncle Joe would say, and then they would, you know, buy more
Buy more bullets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he said that they they pretty much had to get an animal with every shot. So they
Yes,
were
sir.
parsimonious with their shots.
Couldn't waste that ammo. I'll tell you a funny story about me and my brother. He may not remember it just exactly the way I'm going to tell it, but we used to catch skunks, and they had a bounty on them,
Oh,
and you could get a quarter a pelt for a skunk hide, and that was a quarter was that big around back in those days, and on a good day we could catch 7 or 8.
well,
And we'd skin them. Granddaddy taught us how to skin them and how to tack the hide up on the barn door
yeah.
so it'd dry. And we'd take them into Louisville, and the guy there at the county office would pay us a quarter apiece. So, but it was a smelly job, and my mother didn't like it one bit. She said, "I'll give you a quarter if you won't come bring your clothes. I can't get that stink out of your clothes." And but we loved it. Boy, we loved making that money. We'd buy baseball gloves and things that the boys in town had, you know. And so anyway, our house set back off of the road about, it seemed like 100 yards, but it probably wasn't 25 yards. But anyway, when you turned off of the road into our driveway, well, there was a culvert, a tin horn, and it was about this big around, that went under the driveway so the water could, you know, go down.
Is that where you find skunk sometimes? Or?
Well, this particular day, the bus came right in front of our house, and so Mother told us she had to go to town, and she said, "Now you boys don't miss that bus. I want you to catch that bus. They'll be by here, you know." And so she left us on our own, and so we heard the bus coming down the road. Well, just as we got to that culvert, we saw a skunk run in that. And boy, I said, "There's a quarter." And so my brother got on one end and laid on his stomach, and he was throwing rocks in that culvert trying to chase that skunk out. And I was on the other end.
Gonna clobber it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, waiting to catch him, see. And so I was chunking at him too, trying to run him out on there because I wanted him to catch him and get the stink, you know,
Yeah.
get sprayed. But anyway, he came out on my end. And when he did, well, I just nabbed him. And of course, boy, he just sprayed me all over. Well, the bus driver pulled up and stopped and opened the door and just shut it back and drove off. He said, "You boys not getting on this bus." And so we had the rest of the day off because Mother was gone, Daddy was gone, and we missed the bus. And so
Had a skunk in here.
we made several dollars that day catching skunks. But the punishment we got wasn't worth it. Mother tore us up when she got home.
Huh, that's a good story.
Yeah, that was a long time ago.
But yeah, so tell us more about your mom.
She was strict. She was a very strict disciplinarian. I think maybe because she had us a little bit late in life. She had the girls. Well, let's see. Mother was 30 when I was born, because she was 60 when I was 30. And you know, we were a little bit rowdy, and she had to do something because Daddy was, like I say, he was kind of quiet, and he could tolerate a little bit more than she could because he didn't have to wash the dirty clothes and pull the thorns out of her arms and her hands and her. But anyway, you know, she wanted us to be dignified and little gentlemen, but we didn't want to be that. We wanted to be wild and reckless, and so she had to be a little bit stricter with us than she did the girls, but she was fair, and she was smart. My daddy never did finish the 3rd grade, and there's a story that goes with that. I'll tell you when I get through telling about Mother. But Mother had a high school education, and she read quite a bit, and she was very, very devout Christian.
Church of Christ?
Yeah. Daddy was a little bit standoffish, you know. He didn't really think it was necessary to go to church every time the door opened, you know, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night.
I like that way of putting it, every time the door opens.
Yes, sir. And my mother, as long as we lived at home, she said, you're going to church. And on Sunday morning, you know, you've been around people who say, well, it's Sunday, are we going to go to church today? You didn't ask that question around my mother, because if it was Sunday, you were going to church. And you were going to sit still, and you were going to listen, and you were going to take part. And if you didn't, she'd grab you right out of there and just pinch until,
Ow.
oh man, she could lift me up off of that pew.
Ow.
Because I'd try to sleep, and I'd try to talk and stuff. But anyway, Daddy, whenever he was in the 4th grade, well, back in those days, the school marm lived with people in the community.
Right.
They couldn't afford a home, and besides that, it was rural, you know, and so Granddaddy was on the school board, so they just had one kid, so she moved in with Ma and Granddaddy, and everything was fine. Clarence was doing fairly well in school, but he wasn't setting any records, you know, and once in a while he'd act up, and she'd have to make him go outside, stand, you know, wait on the porch. Well, one day he did something, and the teacher made him go outside, and she said, you go out on the porch and you stay out there until you can behave yourself. Well, it was kind of cold, and he thought it would be a little bit more comfortable with fire, so he went in under the porch of the schoolhouse and built a little fire so he could sit, you know. Well, it got out of control, and it caught the porch on fire, and like to burn the schoolhouse down, which didn't matter to him a bit because he didn't want to go anyway. But anyway, that day, whenever the school marm came home, well, of course, she had to tell Ma and Granddaddy what little baby Clarence had done, and Granddaddy said, well, if that's the way you're going to act, well, we might as well just keep you at home. So that was the end of his schooling.
Oh.
The 4th grade was as far as he ever went.
Wow.
But like I say, if he had an education, he could have, no telling what he could have done. But he didn't. And
at that time in his life, yeah.
And he was a little bit the same way about religion. He didn't despise it. He wasn't a heathen, but he just didn't really see any need in going through all that stuff every Sunday and every Sunday night. And but later on, after us kids, you know, got a little bit bigger, well, he'd start going with her and helping her corral us and take care of us, and then finally he became a Christian, and of course that made Mother happy, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And but anyway, it was a great childhood. We never were wealthy people, but we never did want, you know. We always had what we needed. We didn't always have what we wanted, but they provided for us, and then of course we worked. We were taught to work from the time we were big enough to walk, you know. And so we worked always had a job through high school.
What were some of your chores when
Larry,
you were?
hold on, your mom's gonna leave. She needs to leave the room.
Okay. Well, okay, let's take a break so Mom can get. Oh no, I really appreciate this. This is great.
Well, I hope
we haven't heard a lot about.
I know, some of these stories are going to be great to replay for the kids. The
Oh.
fire one. And the
You know-
skunk one, my son has gone on his own skunk hunts.
It's you know, really and truly, even you kids don't realize how it was.
No.
And then it's hard for me to realize how it was for my dad. You know, coming up with, they had no electricity, they had no indoor facilities. And my kids, you know, they don't even know what an outhouse is. except what I've told them, you know.
Uh-huh.
But until we moved to Louisville in 1949, we didn't even have an indoor toilet. We didn't have electricity. Daddy invented a thing called Delco. It was a Delco plant where you take these big batteries and it had a gasoline engine, and you would crank that gasoline engine and let it run, and it would charge these batteries, and then that light bulb would burn until all that juice was gone out of those batteries, and then it'd just fade out, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And he rigged our house. He wired the whole thing and did it all. But you'd have to go up and crank that engine, see, and let it run, and then you'd have to go up there and cut it off, and or if it ran out of gas, you'd have to do all that. But it's hard to imagine how people existed without a microwave, without a TV.
That was life in America. I mean,
Sure.
was that way.
And they entertained themselves. We had a crystal set.
Oh, for the
We had a
radio.
radio, and Daddy made it. He made it out of a salt. I'll never forget it. He made it out of a salt box and copper wire. He wrapped this copper wire around this Martin salt box,
Mm-hmm.
and it had a little crystal with a little metal thing, and he'd stick that metal thing on the copper wire, and then he'd hook it up to the screen, and you had a headset, and you had to listen real close, and you kept moving that. They called it a finder anyway. You kept moving that thing around on that crystal until you picked up a radio station, and boy, and then once you got it on a radio station, you'd leave it alone, you know.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And then Daddy later on he rigged up a deal where everybody could hear it. So you had to wear those headsets the way it was, but Daddy rigged up a way to amplify it so we could all hear it. And he used an old washpan, and he'd put those headsets in that washpan and then turn it a certain way, and you could hear it all over the room, kind of like a
Speaker.
microphone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
And but one of the things that my grandmother Slater told me about Daddy was that, of course, he was an only child, and he was kind of pampered, you know, and they had some neighbors that lived down the road, and one night they were going to make ice cream with the old freezer,
Sure.
you know, old hand crank. But Ma didn't have any sugar. She didn't have enough sugar. And so she told Daddy, she said, I can't make ice cream unless we get some more sugar. And he said, well, why don't I go down to Mr. and Miss Coker's and borrow some? And she said, okay, but don't tell them what we're going to do because we don't have enough, you know,
Sure.
because they want to come if you tell them. Okay, I won't tell them. And she said, now just be real discreet and don't blow our cover, you know. So Daddy starts down the road, you know, and he's got his little bucket of the sugar, and Miss Coker tells this, you know, and she told Mom, said, Clarence knocked on the door, and she said, hi, Mr. Slater, can I help you? And he said, yes, ma'am, I need to borrow some sugar. And she said, well, fine, I've got some. And he said, we're going to make some ice cream tonight, but Ma told me not to tell y'all about it. And, you know, just,
Blew the whole.
yeah. Ma told him not to tell him, and he told the truth. She told him not to tell him. But I thought that was so funny. And,
Well, obviously Miss Coker did too.
yeah. But, you know, the way that they had to live, they had their own chickens, and they always had plenty of eggs, and they had their own cows. And Granddaddy always milked 2 or 3 little Jersey cows. And they always had 2 or 3 calves on them. And they'd raise a beef, you know, and they killed them right there at home. They didn't take them to
Well, yeah.
town. And they had hogs, and they'd always kill a hog every year and have plenty bacon and hams and sausage. And they did all that right there at home. And we had a big smokehouse. It was almost as big as our house. And you could go in that smokehouse, and there was fresh hams hanging, and they had shelves where they'd lay the bacon, you know, the big old slabs of bacon this big. And there'd be that much salt and brown sugar on top of them, you know, to cure them. no refrigeration, no additives or anything, you know, to preserve it. And of course they would can everything out of the garden, tomatoes. They'd have canned tomatoes and peaches and plum jelly and jams, and there was always plenty of food. There just wasn't any money, you know. There wasn't any no plastic, no visas, no discoveries, and but they made it, and they like I said, Grenade paid that farm off.
Now, how far was that from Paris or in Salina?
Well, it's Salina is only about 17 or 18 miles from where our farm was, but Paris is a long way. It's
Yeah.
probably 100.
Yeah, because Salina's down by Dallas.
Yeah, Salina is right north of Prosper.
Mhm.
It's only 6 miles from Prosper, and Prosper is only about a mile from. I don't know how y'all came in. Y'all probably came in on 121.
Oh, I don't remember the
Yeah.
roads now.
Yeah. But there's a road that goes north out of Frisco, and it's called 289 and Preston Road, and that's where Prosper is, and then Salina, and
I
then
remember
Sherman.
Preston.
Yeah.
So, what do you remember of Texas? Did people ever talk? Excuse me, Tennessee.
Not a whole lot. My granddad's dad was John Wesley Sr., and then his dad was Joseph Milo, and he was the one that came from Arkansas.
Joseph Milo. That was his last name, Milo?
Slater.
Slater.
Joseph Milo Slater. See, and there's another J.M., and that's my initial, J.M. Just coincidence, I guess, but it's
liked
kind
it,
of,
yeah.
yeah. But Joseph Milo is buried there in one of the local cemeteries, and if we get a chance this summer, well, I'll take you over and show you.
Now, Papa's full name was,
James Madison.
and his father's name, I just know him as M.H.
I don't know.
And Gerald thought maybe it was Moses. How are we doing on light? Do we need to turn the other light on? Or what do you think, Jack?
Okay for now.
Okay.
I just don't know about Papa's daddy, but he's the one, I think maybe it might have been his father was the one that had the deed to the mule and the Negro. But I CJW's got that information. He knows the name. Maybe this year we'll find out.
We'll have to milk him a little bit for information.
Yeah.
Then if their family.
My brother told me that he's going to have a scanner there, so if anybody brings any pictures or any documents, we can scan them and then print them. See, so that'll be beneficial.
What was that?
Oh, do you know anything about your mother's childhood?
No, not other than just they were just typical farm kids, you know, and they worked in the fields. And
But she did graduate 11th grade.
yeah,
And they're at that high school. So if we can ever find, maybe somewhere has got one of those.
my brother's got one. He's got a picture of her graduating class.
Oh.
Mine, see, my house burnt in 1989, and I lost everything I had.
Oh, that's terrible.
You know, pictures and records and stories. My grandmother Slater lived to be 93, and she was sharp as a tack up until 6 months before she died. And she wrote down a lot of stuff for me, and I had it written in her handwriting, but I lost it.
Oh, that's sad.
And I wished I'd have had her do a audio tape, you know, and then because I'm sure that all the other kids would have gotten a copy, you know, if we'd have had that, but we didn't. So.
Oh, that's too bad. So, do you know anything about there being a Texas Ranger in the family? I heard that somewhere, and I'm trying to.
Well, I was talking to Ada a while ago, and it seems like that one of Joe Lester's wife,
Sheila? Peaks?
Sheila.
Sheila Ion Peaks was her name.
Seemed like Ada said that her mom got a horse for her wedding gift, and her husband was a ranger or some kind of a policeman or something there in Texas. But I don't. That's the first I'd heard about it when Ada was telling me, and I may be wrong about who she was talking about, but.
What about, I know you already said about James Madison.
5 minutes on the
Okay,
tape.
okay, that James Madison's wife, you saw a picture of her before? Do you know what kind of Indian background she had, or?
I sure don't. If I ever knew, I can't remember it.
No, I'd heard Cherokee and Apache,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure where I got
She's
that
never
from.
seen anything.
That might have been from Gerald, or it might have been from somebody else at the family reunion.
There's another story about my grandma Slater. When she was a little girl, they lived in a tent. Now, if you can imagine this, and she was the oldest of the kids, and so she was kind of helping the mother take care of the smaller kids, and the men were all out working. They were cutting trees to build a house, but they lived in this tent, and the neighbors had told them, said, now y'all really have to watch for Indians, because if they think that you have some horses or cattle, well, they'll steal them, and you don't want to oppose them. Just let them do it, because they'll kill you. And of course, the story, how kids are, they make it worse than it was, But Mom said they were scared. And anyway, the men were all out working, and one day they heard these horses coming, and they could hear voices, and their mother said, "Oh my goodness, there comes those Indians." And so all they had to defend themselves was a butcher knife, and her mother stood by the flap on the tent and had the kids all behind her, and she had this butcher knife, and she says, I'll hold them off as long as I can, And so they rode up out in front, and they stopped. The horses all stopped, and she could hear them blowing, and nobody came in. And so finally her mother opened the flap a little so she could see, and it was a bunch of wild horses that was just on the move, and they just ran up there, and they had a water trough out there, and they stopped and got them a drink, and then they went on. But she said that she'd never forget that.
Oh, wow.
With a butcher knife behind her.
That's different.
Yeah, that was in the 1800s, before the turn of the century.
It's amazing. Just
Yep.
a few years makes such a big difference.
Yeah. And it just shows you how wild that country was around. You think of places like Tucson and Yuma and places like that being frontier country, but you don't think about old Louisville, Texas. At one time, that was a frontier. That's as far west as anybody had gone, And they had to build it all from scratch.
Well, thank you,
Just
Gerald.
2 minutes on the tape.
Okay.
What do you want to add? Tell us what you'd like to add. Last thought.
Well, I don't know whether I told Larry and Joan or not, but in 1984, I was hooked up with a radio station there in Fort Worth. I had a barbecue place, and they got me to go around and do the remote broadcast. I'd take barbecue, and so anyway, the World Championship chili cook-off was a big deal, and they had it in Telingra, Texas, down on the Mexican border. And the president of the radio station thought it would be a good idea if we were represented at the chili cook-off. And he told me, he said, I want you to do whatever you have to do to get invited. It's an invitation only. You have to have so many points. Mm-hmm. You have to win so many or have so many points to be invited to the... Well, I got my points, and I went and I won.
Really?
I am a world champion chili cook.
Well, boy.
And the name of my chili is Road Gang chili. And my youngest son worked on the highway department, and of course they had to pick up all this roadkill, you know, that was out on the highway. And they asked me on an interview one time, said, well, how come you call your chili road gang? I said, well, my son picks up all this roadkill, you know, and brings it to me, and I use that in my chili. And of course, that spiced it up, you know. So
Spiced up the story anyway.
yeah, but
What's your recipe? What was your secret?
well, I didn't bring my briefcase, but I'll fax you. I mean, I'll email you a copy of my chili. Lots of chili pepper, lots of onions, lots of tomatoes, and good. Not real lean meat, but you know, just a good cut of beef.
Have you ever raised your own chilies?
No,
You've never grown your own?
no.
Okay.
We there was a chili place there in Fort Worth where I bought all my spices.
Huh. I wonder if we could get you to make chili while you're in town.
If we have the ingredients, we'll make it.
Wow.
It's
That would
no
be
problem.
something.
All right.
Thank you.
So cool. Thank you.
Take that off.
Well, I hope that'll be.
Oh, that's a treasure. That's a keeper. That's great.
I'm sorry I got